I was born in 1977. I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, and we always, and I think with film fans, we always just, it's one camp. Who's going to make Robert De Niro and Pacino have a movie together? Is it going to be Coppola or Scorsese? And you had to be one camp. It's almost like, G.I. Joe or Transformers, where it's going to be totally Coppola. It's going to be totally Scorsese.
Because Coppola already got them together, just not with any scenes.
Yeah, without any scenes. Who's going to actually do it where they get them together? And I was totally committed that obviously it's going to be Coppola, and we're all wrong. It was going to be Michael Mann. We're like, how the hell did that happen?
And the irony, of course, is Michael Mann got them together for one scene.
Yeah,
and they're still not together for most of the movie.
And I remember as a kid, there was a picture in the movie magazines. There's a picture of them together, and like, how did Michael Mann pull this off?
Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. We're going to talk about the second film that features Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. The first one where they share scenes out of, 4 films that they've done in their career together. 3 of them are great. We're going to talk about Heat. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hey, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. Of course, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for deals to tell us what to do and critique more Michael Mann movies. We still have a few more to go. Both Kyle and I are film critics of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. We're both members. Check out that webpage for other critics' reviews as well as ours. Today, we're talking about one of the pivotal movies of the 90s, even though it got not a lot of critical acclaim. It's Heat.
Yeah, so Neil McCauley and his criminal crew are like a well-oiled machine. That is until a potential new member makes a bad call on an armored truck heist.
He's a serial killer, too.
Yeah. In doing so, McCauley and his crew run across Lieutenant Vincent Hanna, a career cop who's always put the job before family. Hanna's failing relationship feels the strain of his hunt for McCauley, and soon the heat is on both of them.
So Heat, it comes from what we talked about in the movie Thief, where Michael Mann was struggling to write a script for Straight Time starring Dustin Hoffman. His scripts were continually rejected. He just went to prison to talk to interview prisoners, and I think one of them had to be Neil McCauley.
He actually had a connection with Chicago cop Chuck Adamson, who was the inspiration for Hanna.
Okay.
Adamson was the guy who chased McCauley, but he was also the guy who arrested Frank Hoheimer, who was the writer of the book that Thief is based on and the inspiration for James Caan's character.
Right.
So Adamson had a lot of connection into that kind of a world. They kind of developed this discussion kind of basis, and that it slowly built itself to the film that we now call L.A. Takedown, but then later was remade.
Yeah, so if you didn't know, Heat was actually began as a TV series, TV pilot, L.A. Takedown. You can find it. It was only available for purchase for VHS outside America. We never really got a chance to see it, other than if you could find maybe because it was a pitch pilot and it got rejected, so it's very hard to find. I think you can find it on YouTube now.
I think YouTube has it now.
Yeah. So of course, when Michael Mann, when one avenue is closed, you're going to go find another avenue to work with.
And this is something Michael Mann would later do when he remade the first several episodes of Miami Vice into the film as well. He kind of took the things that worked and the things that didn't work and updated it for a new time period and kind of created a wholly new beast out of the same bones. Michael Mann tends to be a recycler in a lot of ways. He used parts of Thief in Miami Vice. He used parts of Manhunter in some of his later films. And he also is an actor recycler, where if he likes you and he works with you well, you're going to see him again. Because he kept kind of using these same kind of people. It feels like a family of filmmaking, potential, because he does kind of keep that same close-knitness. But that also helps, because when you look at something as early as, film like The Keep, film like Manhunter, Miami Vice, the stuff he worked on there, it all seems to come together in later on his career and make to, I think, one of the best later films in his career, which was Heat.
My overall critique of the movie is, I think from Heat, from his previous works, you have Michael Mann actually has a sense of maturity in his filmmaking. You have a lot of, I'm not talking about obviously the characters have a little bit of immaturity in them, like James Caan, but you have a very much, and I think when he watches the takes of L.A. Takedown, where it's constantly bombardment of sensationalism, way overdone action, that he knew, okay, why don't we settle things down a little bit, even with the music, and we'll amplify some sets, and you have the right temperament. I think this is actually Michael Mann growing up with other movies.
Yeah, there's a maturity level, there's a confidence level in what he's doing here.
Yeah.
Because all the rest of his other films prior to this, you see a level of, I don't want to say uncertainty, but even now, like watching some of the special features for Thief, he talks even about things like, you know, I wondered if the musician's Tangerine Dream was the right call for this film. I don't feel like he's making those same kind of self-doubt questions
with this one.
With this movie.
Right.
This feels like a mature, confident film. What's interesting to me is if you asked me going into this, which one of these two actors is going to be the good guy, I would have said Robert De Niro. Because I just felt like, but I think that's part of what he's doing is maybe he is placing Robert De Niro, a person we would consider to be more likely to be the good guy, into the bad role, and then placing someone like an Al Pacino who, you know, he's the Godfather, you know? He's the guy who went to villainy. We kind of just put him in the good guy role so that we can see how close they actually get to one another.
Yeah.
So,
and as we were talking about this, I feel like we're highly underdressed for this. I should have brought my suit out for this.
Well, we're not having lunch in a cafe, so when we do that, we'll bring the suits.
One of the funny little nugget of trivia, there's only one actor that was in LA Takedown and Heat, and that's Xander Berkeley. He actually was in both of those.
Yeah, he was upgraded to, or downgraded, I think. Because I think he was playing a larger role in LA Takedown.
Well, he was Wayne Grow in the LA Takedown, but yeah, and then in this movie, he did something else. The other thing is there's two musicians in the movie. You have Tony Locke playing a bad guy, but you also have Henry Rollins, too. So it's kind of like a little flavor of musicians. Well, and then you have a real legit person that was a career criminal, Danny Trejo.
Yep.
Who actually
probably
was a consultant about being a criminal.
Oh, well, that's true. He was hired alongside, he was considered to be hired with Eddie Bunker, who we would have seen, of course, playing in Reservoir Dogs. Okay. And was actually the inspiration for Jon Voight's character of Nate. He inspired him. So we had both of those kinds of people that Mann was aware of, that had worked with in that sense. Trejo, again, wanted to kind of get into the acting part of it. And so it's ironic that the only criminal in the cast, you know, like that notable criminal in the cast, is the guy who doesn't go to the big shootout scene, the iconic action set piece 2 hours into the movie, is he's caught up somewhere else. There's kind of that skirting of like criminals to actors, actors to criminals. The actor that played Wayne Grow went to prison for 2 years in 2003. Was it weed? I think it was some smaller. I think it was a smaller charge. Yeah. But he was referred to in prison by all the other inmates as Wayne Grow, and he wasn't trusted. And it's like that blending together of good and bad, of actor and criminal, of all these elements right there. It's real. And I read something funny that Michael Mann set up a 2-night dinner at a restaurant. The first night he had all the cop actors interacting with actual cops. The second night he had all the criminal actors interacting with actual criminals and their families to get a sensation of what's the home life like. Yeah. And so there is kind of a blending because Mann knit all that together.
One of the interesting things I usually see about this movie is I'm trying to find the right word for it, but you have Neil and Vincent. Vincent is order. Neil is, I would say, anarchy. He's not much chaos.
Not chaos.
He's anarchy. You know, he's almost like somebody that's his philosophy is the system is broken. I want to be outside the system and not break the rules to maintain a lifestyle. Yeah. Where you have Vincent who is with the rules and he's going to, anybody who breaks the rules is a criminal and I'm going to find them. And you have their ideology. I wouldn't now say it's corrupting them, but it's malignant. It's damaging them. That their ideology that they face, they cannot break from it. Yeah. But it's so damaging and toxic for them. But they believe it wholeheartedly, and it's ruining their lives, their ideology, which is their contrast. And you have Vincent, who Al Pacino confessed a couple of years ago was actually a coke addict.
Yeah. Well, it was in the script that, he had a cocaine problem that wasn't included in the actual film, but that's why you can see things. He was playing all that, like, the yelling stuff that, don't waste my time. Like, all that stuff was because of the coke problem he assumed would be more prevalent in the finished film, and it ended up not being in there. Yeah. I think Vincent, for me, feels like rigidity versus Neil's looseness. Because Neil has a code of ethics that he plays by, the iconic line of, never have anything in your life that you can't leave in 30 seconds if the heat gets on you. I'm saying it wrong. But he's got that ability to, and he starts to, the looseness is that he starts to get involved with like Amy Brenneman's Edie. He starts to get comfortable where he is, which is his biggest problem.
Well, who breaks their ideology?
Yeah.
And that's Neil, and that damages him.
Yep. Whereas Vincent's rigidity causes, he's had 2 failed marriages prior to this, and he's failing a third right now. And so he can't break his own ideology because he has to be the cop. He has to be the job.
And he's never going to stop.
Yeah. And so he starts to see the breaking too, but it might be for the better. We don't get a final answer on that, but we start to see the elements of his connection. That's why I think Natalie Portman, for being a very, very small character in the film, is so important to Vincent's arc, because it's when he starts to break his rigidity to the job, is that he could leave. He could go chase Neil, but he's like, I have to stay with her. Like, it's not even my daughter, but she is my daughter, you know?
Yeah. And so if you want to be, and like, I don't really celebrate Michael Mann's writing, but he's very good at understanding contrast, and you have to have a balance, and that's perfect for Neil and Vincent. Everybody, that's the whole point of the movie, but they understand their differences, but they're also the same, their ideology and how they manufacture it, because not only that, they're impressed by each other.
Yeah, there's a level of respect that I do think we probably get more often.
Literally, yeah, because they both respect each other as professionals.
Yeah. The thing about Michael Mann's writing, because you make a good point, I think if Michael Mann was writing screenplays for other directors, it would be a problem for me. And if he was directing, and when he directs stuff that's not written by him, it's more noticeable. He seems to have this understanding of screenwriting his own work, directing his own page, that really feels auteuristic. It feels like something that he's able to malleably work with. It's kind of, again, like when you see a Tarantino script directed by someone else, there's something different.
You malleable. You can work with it. It's not stationary. But some things are really, yes, I like that line. Let's keep it in there.
Yeah, he's writing Michael Mann movies. Yeah. And that's the important thing, is that he is not betraying his own vision in the screenplay or in the directing. And so I don't really have a lot of issues with his screenplays that he directs, because it's his. Like, it is his vision that's one way all the way through.
Yeah. So you have a long, sweeping, epic film, and how do you start it? You have to have a big, what we learned from Kurosawa. You have to have your big action first, and then you settle down the story. And a very clever, effective way of showing a code of conduct with the criminals, but also that they're actually relatively all right guys. What they're actually doing is stealing bearer bonds, which is bonds that if you have them, you own them. And so what they're going to do is, person that previously owned them, they'll sell them back to him at a reduced rate, lower than the value they are. So everybody makes money, and you get them back, pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
But instead they get screwed over because he's so mad that he stole them from him.
Yeah. Well, you get that with Neil
That's what's
McCauley
happening
in
the
that
first
first
movie.
scene, as well as the iconic, the big set piece 2 hours into the film, the bank robbery, is even that moment where he goes, "You guys are insured. None of this money is yours that we're stealing. Do not worry, but do not act." Like,
so they're not stealing
a Robin
from
Hood
personal.
aspect.
Yeah, they're not stealing from personal assets. They're stealing from a business or a bank.
They're stealing from the insurance companies. They're stealing from the government in some ways, where they're kind of holding out on to that. So like, there's a criminal aspect to it, but yeah, there's a code of conduct. It's a loose code because they know that they are going to have to move around within that level.
Right.
But they have certain things that you do not do that bring the heat on you, and that's where the Waingro character comes into play. They use the action set piece to define the characters. By the end of that first sequence, we know everyone in Macaulay's crew, which is really fascinating, because there's 5 characters in that crew, I think, and we know them all by the end of that first
I know their
sequence.
personalities. I know Tom Soremore's personality, right?
Yep.
What Michael Mann uses effectively in this movie, and I think it's masterful, I think it's one of the tough things to do, is every snippet is a moment of time that you want to hold on to. And I think even the characters want to hold on to. Even in the dinner scene, when it's almost like the last dinner that they're going to have, that they understand it, but they're having fun, but they're looking at each other like, this is the last time we probably ever see each other this way.
Without a gun. Yeah.
Without a gun. Even, not only that, so snippets of moments of time that you want to class, even the characters want to hold on to, but there's tension every step of the way. Even when everything is decompressed, there's tension throughout the whole movie.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that scene, because it's
the dinner scene?
Yeah, the diner is probably the most iconic non-action scene in the film. And maybe even the most iconic scene in the entire film.
And they
Because it is
inspired
the only
on it.
scene that they have. Yeah. What I think is interesting is there was no rehearsal for that. Both actors knew the lines, but they never played them together. They spent most of the film not.
Oh, you're
acting
referring to
together.
the final scene of them.
I mean, yeah, the two of them together.
together. I was talking about when the crew gets together and their dinner scene and they get spied on.
Yeah, that's a good scene in itself too. But I mean, when you get De Niro and Pacino finally sharing a scene together,
Yes, not
and
rehearsed.
not rehearsing, playing off the cuff, you can see there's an uncomfortability to both of them, because they hadn't worked together many times. They knew each other. They been friendly with each other outside the film, but being able to actually trade lines together, there's an uncomfortability to both of them, but there's that mutual respect as well. So it's kind of a fun scene because all the actors and Michael Mann were looking forward to that scene. It was one of the later ones during the shoot, and they always were just like, when can we get that one? When can we do that one? It was a grandiose scene that defined both characters from the beginning of the film and changed them going into the end of the film. That last scene, the shootout under the planes, wouldn't have worked if the diner scene didn't work as well.
And let's carry on a little bit about the dinner scene, because it's not rehearsed, but also the extras were not told to rehearse. And that's another aesthetic that Michael Mann liked, because if the actors are not rehearsed, let's have the whole scene not rehearsed. Let's have sound. Let's be awkward, the conversations. Let's have it actually like an authentic dinner of them not really knowing who they are.
Yep.
Of having a conversation that's awkward. I think it's 2 camera. It's not a 3 camera. I think
he had 2 cameras going because he didn't want to have to do it again.
Yeah.
He wanted to get as much footage as he could on the first go through, so that the actors didn't become comfortable.
Right. And then what you do is, aesthetically, you have to have something that's a barometer, that's staple, that keeps the action going. You have to have something stationary, and it's a ketchup bottle.
Yeah, and it's just everything is kind of it's almost like a chess game with the food and the drinks and the table pieces.
It's a color aesthetic that balances out it's the ketchup bottle, which is really interesting, because if you watch stills, Michael Mann's constantly moving the ketchup bottle to have it a balanced median of the shot, and not a much color.
Well, and Mann has a very strong connection to color palette, to visual aesthetic. It's more prevalent in his 80s films. And I criticized on other films that we've talked about of him, as he goes through his career, his aughts films. As he gets further down that pipe, he doesn't use it as much.
No, but you understand the necessity, because they're wearing dark clothing. Neil's wearing gray. You have to have something to balance the shot color-wise.
Well, that's what I mean. He does that. Yeah. It's like the last movie that I really think he completely pushes for that color palette and completely embraces it. It's a movie that every single sequence at night outside, you've got that blue tint to it. Yep. It's a Michael Mann movie.
Right, but you have to mute sometimes, and that's the reason why he's wearing gray, because you don't want to stand out very much. Yep. You don't want to pop your colors. Look flashy. You want to reserve to blend in your environment. And that's what Neil is. He doesn't want to talk as much as he needs to.
Doesn't want to give the information that could lead to his capture,
Right. Let's talk about what Michael Mann calls a postmodern character, which is Val Kilmer. Initially, it was supposed to be somebody else. I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't recall who it was. There was a number of people that were in the position. Val Kilmer was tied up with Batman Forever. Yeah. And there was a schedule adjustment that allowed him to play the character, which is funny because I think he's more recognizable in Heat than he probably was as a Batman, because there's a bunch of Batman, but he owns a lot of the sequences he's in Heat, facing off against titans like Pacino and De Niro, and Val Kilmer is one of the equally memorable characters in the film.
So you have to do contrast, and I think it's right that when you're doing contrast with Neil and Vincent, Val Kilmer's character is contrast to Neil. He's doing everything. He's got a marriage. He's family guy. Even though it's a fraudulent projection of family and Norma now, because even Ashley Judd is upset with his lifestyle. It's all fraud. Yeah.
There's something, I think he loves her, but he can't be a good husband to her. That's how I took his character, is that I do think there's a love, because there's that moment where, and she seems to love him too, but she knows he can't be a good husband or father, because they have that.
He's not truly authentic to himself.
Yeah.
To her.
They have that constantly pressured the whole time through, where people are just trying to keep them together, but you get that moment where he could be caught now, when she's in hiding and she lets him go. And it's there's that level of, I do think there is a love, but there is a we can't fit, which makes the character tragic, makes the character like someone that we almost want to survive, even though again he's done awful things.
But he's the one that broke the rules, but he understands you have to get away to survive. He's the only one that really gets away with it.
Yeah.
And so it's a very, very different from Neil's path. Is now Val Kilmer is learning the mistakes of, you should have listened to Neil. Don't marry. Don't get invested. It's going to hurt if you have to leave.
Yep.
And he tries so desperately until she says, get away.
Yeah. Chris Shiherlis is a different weapon than De Niro. De Niro's almost like archery. Neil McCauley's
it's
character.
A very different.
Archery,
that's why I say
where there's measurements taken, everything moves the way it has to. You have to understand the wind. You have to understand a lot before you let go of the arrow. Chris, Val Kilmer's character is more of kind of an explosive, because he is able to, he could go in any direction based on the situation. He's always moving and changing his trajectories. And he's, that's one of the reasons he gets away, though, is because he is more chaos in the film. If we're going to go to a character that almost inspired the Joker, because Nolan very clearly, worked the film out.
Yeah.
If we were to go to that comparison, I would say Kilmer is closer to the Joker because he's the unpredictability character. When he's out there in the action, is he will make the right call at the right moment. And that's what he does.
Absolutely. So if, like I said, if we're not using Michael Mann scripts to work on monitor for writer's workshop, but he understands characters and understands that things have to be contradictory. Not only you have to look for, you're not really looking for your authentic self. You have to eventually recognize your authentic self. That having marriage and kids and pretending you're having a family is not for you, whether you fake it or not. But yeah, that's why overall the story works for me. It's a balance, but you understand contrasts throughout we go.
Yeah, this is one of the best chess movies I've ever seen because all the pieces move in a way to capture one another, in a way to take out the enemy, and there's gains and losses on both sides. I love the scene when they're at the truck yard almost, and he realizes that Hannah realizes
he just got played.
Yeah, and they've been played into a trap, and it's great because until that point, Hannah seems to be making all the right calls. I mean, even that scene with Tone Loc where he's like, oh, I spoke to a guy that's going to have your answer, and he doesn't believe him, but then he. It's like, of course, he falls into a trap of, I've got someone who has your answer. He seems to do that a lot throughout the film. He's got the right people to give him the answers, and he plays into a trap in that scene in the docks. And it's like, it's nice to see that there's a film that kind of that respects its villains as much as its heroes. What's funny is that first scene of the film, we know all the villains in the crew. Throughout the rest of the next 2 hours, we get to know all of the heroes. And I think it's nice that it's not just Pacino. We know Wes Studi, we know McKelty Williamson, we know Ted Levine, all the people that worked.
Ted Levine from Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
And he's dialing back, yeah.
I think Levine was actually asked to be one of the criminals, and he didn't want to get typecast, so he asked if he could be one of the good guys. And and then they killed him.
And of course, this leads him to be the detective in Monk.
Yeah, the Papa detective in Monk over there. Yeah. It's a weird movie because of how many people could lead a movie like this, and many of them are the supporting actors because of the legends you have in the front. But you have that because at 2 hours and 50 minutes, Michael Mann is able to give enough characterization to any of these people. I get the feeling almost if you cut Pacino and De Niro out of the film and you could only use the scenes of supporting actors, you'd still have a competent story somewhere in there. It's so great how much he builds around his supporting cast in the same way.
What's interesting is you have a lot of exposition without exposition dialogue, not heavy-handed. You have characters explain themselves with the use of the phrase of slick, and that carries on to he uses the term slick in prison, and that's how you know, that's that guy, or Neil, just with tattoos or something like that. You understand the backstory, but you're not going to get an exposition dump with this movie. Yeah,
which is funny because, again, at close to 3 hours, we have 2 action scenes. Yeah. The first one and the one, even the finale with him and underneath the planes and stuff is not all that actiony. It's a character scene. It's a closing of the plot, if you will, more than an actual. And it's
metaphorically,
action.
Of course, at the airport where you want to flee and get away, and you're not going to be able to.
Yeah. So we have 2 major action sequences, and then we just have a lot of story. And it's funny that the story itself is as equal to the action. When you get to the action set pieces, it doesn't feel like we were missing them. It feels like everything was building towards it again.
Yeah. And I still regard it as one of the top 5 best films of the 90s. And like I said, when it came out in 95, it wasn't really, it had traction, but it wasn't really celebrated as it is now. I have no idea. You have a great lighting, camera work, and story. You have an epic story. I don't know why the Academy ignored this movie.
It's interesting, isn't that? Completely ignored. There wasn't even a cinematography, a music, anything like that. There was nothing. And I think it's funny.
It was hard to rent because you had to rent 2 tapes, and that was double the money. So a lot of people didn't rent the movie as well, and it didn't really show in theaters. So it didn't get a lot of traction until afterwards. A lot of people, film nuts, that really enjoyed the movie because when you rented it, you had to rent 2 movies. It was, instead of $1.99, it was $2.99.
Yeah. You're taking my money.
Yeah,
all right.
My money.
I think it's always fascinating to me to see a film that gets 0 Academy love, and then if you look at something like the Internet Movie Database, IMDb has its rankings of the top films of all time. This is actually at 112 on the greatest films of all time list, which is a skewed list, but it is one that's kind of interesting to look at and see how people view the film in hindsight. 0 Academy Award love but it's gotten to the points now where it's like it's in the top 200 movies of all time according to most people, and I think that's fascinating when a movie builds to that level.
And it has one of the best cop chase scenes of bank robbery.
Oh yeah,
because it's shot really, really well. There's great action, not only because somebody like Ted Levine gets shot dead and you see him die, but you also come back to him, he's still on the ground. You forget, he's still, the casualties are still there.
The organization of how that, especially that giant robbery scene, the way it all plays out and goes down, was used in a number of cop trainings, in a number of FBI training videos that you've seen from the movie. So that should tell you how much we're hitting in terms of the realism aspect that's at play here. And again,
Val Kilmer using his gun effectively, right?
Yeah, and he didn't realize that he was actually doing it correctly because there's all the training. He felt comfortable. He wasn't given like direction to do the change outs like that, to do the reloads, but he did it in a way where later on now it's viewed as, that's the way it plays out. The realism really, really helps here. Yeah. So
it's just kind of outdated now because nobody will rob a bank with money. Now you just hack into it digitally.
Yeah.
And get probably more money that way. Nobody's going to look for physical cash anymore. Nobody's going to print out a receipt.
That's why
print out research or anything like that.
That's why I'm really curious. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Michael Mann wrote Heat 2.
Yes, that's why we're talking about.
A book just came out.
Yeah, a book. Yeah.
Which is a kind of Godfather 2 style. I think it's got some like heavy flashback scenes and then some current scenes. I'm curious what the plot currently would be for a Heat 2. I can understand a lot of the flashback.
It has to be
stuff.
Val Kilmer's character.
Yeah, so I'm curious. It's a book I ordered, hasn't arrived yet. I'm very excited to read Heat 2.
Yeah, I am too. I haven't ordered yet, but I'm definitely going to read it.
So I'm very fascinated about that. I wish there was a way that you could make it into some sort of movie, but the time has passed probably. But what I do find interesting is, so this is the first film of 2 that he would take elements from previously and recontextualize them. Heat here and then Miami Vice, which leads me to he could do it one more time and he could remake The Keep. Please do it, Michael.
He wants to remake The Keep. I think it's a good story. If you read the book, there is a good story in there.
As someone, he hates the movie so much. Remake it and we'll never have to speak of the original.
And if you really enjoy Heat, and if you haven't known on the radar, catch Collateral. It's almost the same aesthetic, almost the same kind of storyline, but L.A.
And I'm curious. I think we'll probably have to cover Collateral on the show eventually because I watched Heat in 2005 or so. Didn't love it. I thought it was fine. I love it now, having seen it again. I love this movie. Collateral is similar. I watched it. I don't like that movie, but I kind of want to rewatch it now because I've been finding myself recontextualizing.
You hate a Michael Mann movie? What do you? Come on.
Come on. All right. I'm not big on Black Hat either, but so let us know your thoughts on Heat down below. What's your favorite scene in the movie that's not an action scene? We'd love to hear about, or not the diner scene either. Give us some really deep dives on some of the
Al Pacino's blowout to Hank Azaria.
Oh yeah, the scene where you can see Hank Azaria actually surprised because Got a Great Ass was not part of the screenplay.
Why did you get him mixed up with this?
Yeah. Let us know your thoughts on the film down below. We'd appreciate it. While you're down there, too, like and subscribe. They're 2 free things that you can do. They help support the channel so much more than you would expect, and we do really appreciate it. We love the community that we have here on the show, and we appreciate you guys for watching. If you want to join further into the community, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/KyleNickOnFilm. We got tiers starting as low as $1. You can have access to our secret shows just for Patreons, but then you also have the opportunity to give us feedback on the show, things you'd like to see in future episodes. We're always listening in on that Patreon, and we do really appreciate it. Thank you guys for joining us. You can find all my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
You can find my show, The St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.
I got to leave before the heat's on me.
Oh, Jesus.